everyone, this is Dr. Liz, and you're listening to Include with Dr. Liz. This show is about everyone, all people, including you. It's about people and their diverse lived experience in this world. I chat with guests to get to know them, their identities, and their inclusion needs, so we all have an opportunity to understand how best to include them, so together we can create a world where everyone thrives. Dr. Jessica is a hardworking, kind and daring, hiking-loving and persimmon-hating self-intelligence and workplace culture expert. With intellectual disability and mental illness, Jessica applies her bird's eye view superpower to improve the quality of life of others through her work. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited for this conversation.
As am I. Now, apparently, you used to own a rock and roll school? Okay, come on. How does that come about?
So back in the day, I used to play piano, went to high school, auditioned to get in. So I went to regional art school. I played piano since I was 6 years old. I used to go to church, and at that point in time, I played in the choir as well. And then eventually I played the piano at weddings and funerals as a job. But my biggest thing was I always found it hard to become a member of a band. And so what I was grateful for is that I was in with all of these people, with school, at the church, and other kids growing up were always struggling to be, well, I can't find friends who play another musical instrument. So around the same time, the movie School of Rock had come out, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can totally create this. So I created an 8-week summer camp program that ran for multiple years with students that came in playing all different instruments, but then I gave them the opportunity to come together as a band. I taught them how to lyrically songwrite, how to create a wardrobe so they had stage presence. At the time, they had CD covers, so they designed their own CD covers. And then at the end of the 8-week program, they put on a showcase for their family and friends.
I love that. And you almost even alluded to creating a place of belonging for them, because as you said, you couldn't sort of find your place into a band, but you actually created that space for these kids to experience that.
And that was exactly it. As a kid, if you started playing an instrument, you had the option maybe to play at like a concert or something like that. But there was never that opportunity to say, hey, what if like friends could join? And not everyone's friends play an instrument. So this gave people the opportunity to then say, okay, I'm going to play flute. You can play the drums. You can play guitar, and everyone comes together. So we had a mishmash of different instruments in bands. So there was not just what you saw in music videos, but you could create a band with whatever instrument you wanted to play.
That's brilliant. Bringing diversity together. That is awesome. Okay, so Dr. Jess, where does the doctor come from?
So it's DMD, which is Doctor of Dental Medicine. So I'm a dentist by trade. I specialize in treating cancer patients. However, I am a general dentist.
Okay, so every guest completes a questionnaire, and there's a big long list of identities, and you ticked, let me see, 3 of them. What were they?
So I identify as female, as someone with an intellectual disability, and someone who has experienced mental illness.
So let's just start with intellectual disability. How does that play out for you in your life?
Yeah, so I was actually diagnosed with a learning disability later on in life. So it wasn't until the age of 20. So at this point, I was already in the middle of my undergraduate degree, and I was working towards becoming a dentist. Now, at the exact same time, I had some life-defining moments that happened where my mom, who's bipolar, experienced a motor vehicle accident where she had her 3rd traumatic brain injury and developed psychosis at the time and didn't know who I was. And then my 15-year-old cousin committed suicide because she was being bullied. And then accompanying everything else, my mom, which I appreciate immensely, was always like, why now? You're 2nd year into university. I realize some things have happened, but your marks are just dropping like you wouldn't believe. And she's like, I realize because of life defining moments, they can have an effect, but something's off. So she's like, you know what? Your brother was tested early on. We noticed that he had some comprehension issues as well. So why don't we get you tested? So at the age of 20, I went through all the testing process, and that's when they realized at the age of 20, I was only reading at a grade 7 level. And so I wasn't able to actually interpret everything. So I couldn't keep up with the material that was being thrown my way in my undergraduate degree. And so at that time, I felt dentistry was no way ever going to happen. Like there was no way that I was going to be able to catch up, or that I, they would accept me. Because then here I am thinking, okay, massive stigma. Here's a dentist with a learning disability. Who's going to want to ever go to them? And so on and so forth. So I tumbled in my own thoughts. But little did I know that that opportunity gave me a reason to learn how to learn all over again. And that made me the best educator, coach, consultant, teacher that I have now become, because I can see education from such a different point of view, and recognizing that even when I was education director at the cancer center, that not every resident or fellow is going to learn in the exact same way. So how can I teach them in different ways, and how can I help others teach then others to teach in different ways?
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So tell me, how do you learn best?
So for me, I need a visual aspect of it, and in the sense that something has to be written in front of me. Usually if someone is describing something to me, it's got to be short snippets. But if someone's reading something to me, I kind of get lost amongst it. So I need something that's visual as well. If I'm also learning something that's absolutely brand new and it's heavy, dense reading material, I usually read the first and the last sentence of each paragraph going through, and then I go back and I read through again. And then I go back again and I actually go through what the chapter titles are or the bold fonts. And that gives me the opportunity to piece things together instead of just getting to the end and still being absolutely confused and thinking, what the heck did I just read?
How did you work out this was the right way for you to learn?
So at 20, I was very grateful with my university, where they were able to get me in touch with the learning department, essentially. So there was a couple psychologists. I can't remember the other educators' titles at that point in time. However, those individuals set me up with different software programs, a different way of, okay, let's test this out, let's test this out. And that gave me the opportunity to try to piece things together. So then that way, when it came to studying for exams, I wasn't getting lost in the material.
So you already sort of thanked your mother for encouraging you to get tested. So just even the awareness to begin with, as it being something worth looking into, then having the access to be able to then get that testing, and then of course having those supports available at your university. Now you mentioned that you were a little bit hesitant, that you thought that maybe you'd be judged for it. Was it the case in the end?
You know what? I look back and I know I got side eyes at times from classmates, because one thing that stood out was the fact that I was given extra time for exams because of the reading comprehension. So there were moments in time that I remember being in dental school thinking, okay, well, I can't tell them that I'm going to be in a different room, because then they're going to be like, what do you mean? Why are you in a different room? And then I'd have to say, oh, okay, well, this is what's going on, and so forth. Now, the people who were really close to me, my friends and stuff, obviously that was not a concern whatsoever, but it was always my perception being within a profession and then wondering, okay, well, what are these professors going to think? What are my clinical instructors going to think? And then what are patients going to think? And after you get your degree, it really doesn't matter. You're not telling anyone.
I know reality actually just kicks in.
Right. So like, to me at that point in time, it's just like, no, like that, and I wish I had known that sooner, but unfortunately at that point in time, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking just about everything else that's going on. Now, when it came to certain professors, and I remember the student director at the time at dental school, so very grateful and so accommodating and saying, okay, like, how did this work? Were you okay? Like, just all along the entire path. And that makes a difference. So then you now have individuals who support you and recognize, okay, this isn't going to keep you stuck. This isn't going to make you a bad dentist or a bad person. It's just something unique that now we just have to figure out a different way to accommodate, to help, or to teach you something. And that right there, when that meant I also had to take a stand. So, yes, in my undergrad, there were individuals there. And once that was set up and connected, then those people helped me. But when it came to professional school, I had to actively ask for that help. And that meant when it came from asking for friends to explain things a little bit differently, or going to the professors, or saying, hey, you know what, I need a tutor in this section, I had to make sure that I was on top of that as well. Otherwise, I could totally see how you can slip through the cracks in that sense.
Obviously, there is a self-accountability for
Mm-hmm.
the support that you need. But let's just say I was a professor of yours and you came to me and you said,
Mm-hmm.
look, just found out that comprehension isn't my strong suit and I need some supports and accommodations. What is the ideal response from me? How can I best support you?
Mm-hmm. At that point in time, I think it would even come over a couple of different sessions where, okay, let's figure out, because maybe for this specific topic, so when it came to when I was taking psychology courses or bio courses that had heavier readings, then I needed more time to be able to process because I couldn't keep up with the chapters. So maybe there was a way to say, hey, let's connect you with a TA or a tutor who's able to navigate or help you move through it in a faster way, or to pick up on key aspects. Because it's really interesting when you go to university or when you're taking a certain course and teacher comes over, or professor comes over and says, just read the textbook from start to finish. But then now you have to figure out, but what's actually going to go on the test? Sure, I can memorize a textbook from start to finish. And that was actually a strong suit. That's how I actually got by with the way that I did for so long, is because my memory was so good. But when it came to actually applying and piecing things together, I didn't understand how everything came together. So from a professor standpoint, me going and asking, then checking in even a few weeks later to be like, hey, with what we talked about before, does everything seem clear? Do you need any additional guidance? And if so, where do you think that would be? And then maybe even having some resources in the background as well, because as a student, sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. I'm just listening to how you best learn and also your strengths and areas for development, let's call them, instead of weaknesses.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should have studied together, because I am an exceptionally fast reader that can pull out the key points. It's just like a skill of mine.
Yeah.
My ability to memorize facts is appalling. Like, so I can give you the intent of something, but I can't give you the specifics.
Yeah.
We have just nailed it.
Right. See? And unfortunately, within academia at times, there's that very cutthroat mentality. And so people don't want to share notes, and people don't want to. And I think that that's where individuals need to come together. And I know for one of my cousins who's a decade younger than me, she was telling me about one of her courses, her business courses that she was taking, and all the students in the class, there was like 50 students in the class, had a shared Google document, and everyone took notes throughout the entire lectures and courses. And now you had people going back and highlighting what it was such a collaborative approach. And I don't think that that exists as much as it should within academic settings. And I think if it did, it would help so many more people who didn't realize they had an intellectual disability, to the people who are quote unquote normal or fall in the realm of average. And that gives everyone the opportunity to learn.
Now, so your learning capabilities is only a tiny little fraction of you. Let's weave in a bit of the mental illness stuff.
Yeah.
When did that emerge, and how does that layer over with your learning?
When I was diagnosed with clinical depression, a generalized anxiety disorder, and what I now know to be as my third burnout. I was education director. I was a full-time staff dentist at the cancer center. I sat on local to national dental organizations. I was a clinical instructor. I was doing all the things. So to me, it didn't make sense. And prefacing with my mom, who is bipolar, before I knew what a type of depression was. And so to me, what I was doing, that wasn't depression. And yet, when I was finally diagnosed, my psychiatrist, who I'm so grateful for, said, "You're that high achiever who experiences high functioning anxiety and depression." And so at times I was filling all of the quiet times and those spaces with just doing all the things. And so I really had to give myself the opportunity to choose to take care of me instead of always taking care of others. And I'm very grateful for at the time, because I had moved through and that learning expertise, I knew that at times when it came to learning how to understand my own mental health, that it was going to take time and take time to process it. Now, being that high achiever as well, as soon as I started to learn about what I was experiencing, especially as a high achiever, so incorporating imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and people pleasing, that's when I was just like, okay, well, I need to start sharing this with others. And for me, what I find helps with my own learning is when I get to teach. And that was just the next step in saying, okay, if I can have these conversations open and honest in a profession that still has some stigmas, because you have to be strong enough to be able to be in this profession and you can't show weakness, well, then maybe our suicide rates wouldn't be so high in dentistry. And so I finally felt comfortable sharing what was going on in my life. And when I did, that's when I started to get the response that I did. And I thought, okay, I've opened up a box. I'm going to keep the box open and I'm going to start sharing and keep sharing. So in order to heal myself, I started teaching and showing others what they can do. And then when I finally stepped into that healing aspect, where there is no endpoint because you just have to manage whatever comes up in the future, but I gave myself the tools to navigate to prevent burnout happening time and time again.
When you became more transparent about your own wellness needs, let's call it that, how was that received by others around you?
So initially, when I was initially diagnosed, I tried to test out with certain people within the dental community to see where I felt safe to share what was going on. And I remember with one person in particular who I had gone to, who I thought I could rely on, I had kind of shared offhand saying, hey, I know of someone who's experiencing X, Y, and Z. What are your thoughts on it? And that's when their side came out and it was just like, oh, that person sounds as if they shouldn't be in dentistry, actually. And that kind of hit really close to home. And especially when I was at those initial phases, I then went back and I decided I wanted to be a dentist at 14. And now at 28, 29, I was going through all of these emotions. And so I had linked a large portion of my identity to becoming a dentist. And so I had to not just unpack what this person said to me, but to then recognize that, okay, this person wasn't a safe person to go to, but it doesn't mean that everyone's going to be like that. So I'm going to try again. But it took me a while to even try again, because then that's when you're like, well, who's going to be that next person? So I did. I dropped little breadcrumbs in hopes to kind of test out the water first, so then I wouldn't completely retreat all the way. And then when I started to connect with the right people, that's when all of a sudden they were like, oh my goodness, you're experiencing that? Oh my God, for the last 5 years, I've been experiencing the exact same thing. And then we were able to have a dialogue, and then we were able to then share with others as well. And then that ripple effect that ended up happening. And I think it's becoming easier to have those conversations. However, you still have to be careful with who you choose to pick to be, especially as your first, second, or third person to open up to.
Let's say I was one of those people in your circle that I noticed some of the breadcrumbs. How could I have created that safe space for you? How could I have let you know it's okay to share with me?
I'm going to describe one of my favorite moments, but also embarrassing at the time, was when I was at the cancer center. One of my senior staff, something had happened, and at that point in time, I don't think that he knew about my diagnoses, but he knew something was going on and that I just wasn't myself. And I remember I finished a procedure. I went back to my office. I was so down on myself, having that perfectionist mindset. I was just like, oh my goodness, it didn't go perfectly well. Meanwhile, it went completely fine. But because all my emotions were heightened and I was in that depression state, I picked apart every little thing and nothing I did was good enough. And so I remember the knock on the door. He opened up the door. He closed the door. So it was me and him I was sitting down. He was standing in my office and he's just like, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm fine. And I could feel the tears prickling behind my eyes at this point in time. And I was just like, good, I just finished up, whatever. And all of a sudden, his body language just shifted while he was standing there, very minutely, but shifted and said, no, but are you okay? Oh my God, I'm starting to get those tears again because bringing me right back to that moment in time. I felt so safe. I felt so safe. And all of a sudden, same thing. Tears started to well up. I started to, and he's like, okay. He stood there. It was silence. And all I had to do was let those tears out. He said everything was going to be okay. And he's like, do you want me to stay a little bit longer or is it okay for me to leave now? I was like, no, I think I'm okay. And he's like, I think you're okay too. And he left. And that was all I needed. That was all I needed at that point in time. And I don't think people realize those small moments and how they can have an impact. And it was a senior staff. And I really hate to generalize at this point in time, but an old white male who opened up the door, walked in and said, hey, is everything okay? And that gave me the permission to say, this person is safe. I feel comfortable sharing this emotion. If I need to, I can go to him even later on now, which I then relied on afterwards. And I'm still so grateful to this day for that interaction.
It just took a little bit of kindness and compassion.
Yeah.
And a few moments. Like
Yeah.
It just doesn't take all day.
No.
Just be aware and provide some compassion for a few moments. So we've talked about learning mental illness. How do you think being female wrapped itself up in that? Do you think it made things easier, more difficult?
I think especially within healthcare, being a female was still being a young female, young blonde at the time, very bleach blonde. I would get these random comments at times and people just bypassing unconscious biases that exist. Like the number of times I've gotten, oh, when's the doctor coming in? That's always just something offhand. And for a while too, especially when I first graduated, there was always the comment of, oh, you're so young. And I would interpret that as here I am as this young female at a cancer center, being one of the youngest in the department to begin with. And here is this patient who doesn't trust me. And that always took a piece of me away because then I was just like, well, how am I supposed to provide adequate care to this individual if they don't trust me? Because that is a part of the care aspect of it. And what I had to realize and go back to is that that's also my interpretation of it. They may also just be noticing in comparison to them that, oh my goodness, there's a young person standing in front of me right now. Oh my goodness, you must be really smart, young to be my doctor right now. It could mean
something else, couldn't
right?
it?
Like it could totally mean something else. So I had to separate that aspect from it. But when it came to being female, I definitely noticed interactions between residents and fellows and who interacted with who a little bit better or paid more attention to and that aspect. And as much as at times when people talk about, oh, well, medicine and healthcare classes are 50-50 split now, great. That still doesn't change the fact that as you enter out into the working force, that there's still stigmas and biases. And so when I initially started lecturing, I undervalued what I was speaking at. And then I would hear comments from other people and like through the grapevine being like, well, so-and-so who's a man is actually charging this and I have way more experience than them. And yet when I asked for it, people would say no. But when this person would ask for it, then it was an automatic yes. And so I'm grateful for the mentors, especially the female mentors who were a couple of decades older than me, to sit down with me and say, okay, this is what you're going to be faced against. This is how you should be reacting to it. And listen, it doesn't change your worth or your value. And that gave me the opportunity to then go back and say, okay, well, if this is going to be a challenge, this is how I'm going to react to it and adjust accordingly.
Do you think it's important to be able to see people like you in more senior or more influential roles than you?
100%. And the reason for that is because it then gives the next generation or coworkers of the same age or even individuals who are more senior to say, oh, that person can do it. I can join in and I can support them. And I think for the longest time, women in general have been pitted against each other for the reason that if we all came together, the support that we have, because the way that we communicate from an emotional perspective and understanding the vulnerability and that stuff, we can share that a little bit more openly, I find. And it is so important to see from a visual perspective individuals in those roles, because then it then gives the next person, regardless the age, that it is in fact possible.
And you actually raise a point that keeps coming up with guests that I talk to that talk about the lack of female support around them, and sort of coming up thematically that it's like women are fighting for a smaller number of opportunities. So it's easier not to collaborate with or lift up other women because it gives them a greater opportunity to get into those positions. But what if we just saw it as a world of abundance and we just lifted everyone up at the same time? I want us to get there.
So that is one of the reasons why I've slowly shifted away from dentistry and the clinical aspect of it, because I felt I just had this overwhelming mission and passion towards I need to be lifting more women up, and I needed to be getting more women into leadership roles. And if that means then teaching women how to step away from people pleasing and perfectionism and imposter syndrome, so then it gives them that confidence to say, "Yep, I'm ready," then that's what my role is going to be. And so if I can be that initial center and be the magnet to then bring more women into it, to then lift them up as much as possible, then I know I'm on the right track.
Well, then if you're doing that, then I'll keep working on the systems and processes that are
Yes.
preventing them from rising to the top.
Yes. Okay. Oh my God. I love this. I absolutely love this.
So in your career in dentistry, I know you've kind of segued away into more of the coaching and professional development side of things, which we will come to shortly. But let's say someone like you is still a dentist. What kind of supports would empower you to thrive in your career?
I think what dentistry needs, which I feel like they're slightly behind in this sense, is for our college and our licensing body, there is always the standard, okay, well, there's the mental health aspect, but you have to essentially be knocking on suicidal door to then be able to get help. There has to be a bridge in between that. You shouldn't be at the point where you're in addiction or you're at that end point. There needs to be prevention. So same thing within healthcare and medicine, and when we're treating patients, why are we waiting and only treating symptoms? We should be in the prevention stage. And so what needs to happen is not when dentists graduate, but when students are in school, they should have courses on recognizing when this comes up for them. So I'm not talking about the business course, I'm not talking about the biochemistry course, I'm talking around emotional intelligence, understanding ourself, that self-intelligence piece, because it is so important. Even understanding, okay, how to have a conversation, or how do you leave a conversation when a patient has yelled at you? Right? And especially as a perfectionist, you can leave there being like, oh my goodness, what just happened? I'm bad dentist. And then that tumbles into every other patient visit that you have that day. And then you leave at the end of the day, you carry it home and it sits on your shoulder for who knows how long. And if we have more of these open conversations around those things, then I don't think we're going to have to wait until that end point where you're at the worst case scenario before you can actually get help.
Great suggestion. Let's say there is either a dental student or a newly graduated entering into the dental workforce. What's one tip you would give to them?
They're no longer just the interviewee. They are now the interviewer as well. You do not have to say yes to the first job that comes your way. You do not have to say yes to any job that comes your way. You can give yourself the opportunity to start to explore, what is this type of environment that I want to actually be working in? What do the team members look like? Does it have more technology? Does it have less technology? Give yourself the option to be able to ask yourself and become the interviewer. It is no longer you just showing up saying, hey, these are my straight A's and this is what I did. Please accept me into your clinic. It's no. I need to ask myself, how do I want to practice dentistry? And then from there, say to yourself, okay, how am I going to go interviewing? How do I go about interviewing these other clinics instead of just diving in and accepting the first thing that comes your way?
That's great career advice, whether it's dentistry or any other profession.
Yeah.
So it translates across all the disciplines. Okay, so let's say I work in a dental clinic and I have a new dental graduate coming in to work. If that graduate is a person like you, Jess,
Yep.
what can I do to create an amazing environment so you can thrive?
So that is where you sit down with the individual and ask them, say, what are your aspirations over the next couple of years? Is there specific procedures you want to focus more on? Are there procedures that you absolutely hate that you don't want to be doing? Let me know. Is it because you hate them because you don't like them, or do you hate them because you don't know how to do them? And if you don't know how to do them, can I be that support? Now, you may be that individual as that owner or as that other more senior individual. You need to also check in with yourself. Are you a teacher person? If you're not a teacher person, then potentially offering the individual where to then access those resources or where they can then go. And I think having that open dialogue, it gives people the permission to say, you know what? I only want to be an associate and work 3 days a week because for the next few years, maybe I'm starting a family and that is what I want to be able to focus on. And I think if we can have these conversations right off the bat, then it gives both the more senior individual, whether it's the owner or not, and the new person coming in, the opportunity to also prioritize their personal life. And I think that that gets put by the wayside so often, where first people that we care about are our patients, and then our staff members, our coworkers, our family and friends get the leftovers, and we get maybe a percentage of whatever is left over of that. And so I think if we give ourselves the opportunity to go into those relationships and say, okay, how do I make sure that you're not going to hit burnout your first 4 months into practice? So what do we need to do? And then my biggest ask is always creating those check-in points for individuals, whether that's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but have another open and honest conversation. Is this relationship working? Because if it's not, okay, let's talk about why it's not. And do we have to move on? Or is there something that we can fix? There is no point holding on to these things. And then a year goes by and it's just like, I'm in the most unhappy place ever. Then you feel like you're stuck there.
You're magical. So what magic are you bringing to the world?
My magic that I'm bringing to the world is teaching people around self-intelligence and helping them improve their workplace culture by preventing burnout.
Fantastic. Now we're going to put all of your contact details in the description of the podcast so people can reach out and get in contact if they would like to work with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No, absolutely. It was a joy. Thanks for your time today, Jess.